Imagine standing on the deck of an aircraft carrier in the frozen North Pacific, knowing that within 24 hours you might be dead. December 6, 1941. Zoo. Icy wind howled across the flight deck of the carrier Akagi as Lieutenant Zenji Abe stared into the grey mist hanging over Hitakapu Bay, the cold bit, through his gloves. But his thoughts were far from the chill. Inside his flight jacket, close to his heart, was a farewell letter to his wife, and a small lock of his own hair, a traditional token for his funeral. He had written his final words that morning: "If I do not return, know that I served with honor." But beneath the stoic calm, doubt gnawed at him. Japan was about to strike the United States, a nation many of his superiors claimed was weak, divided, decadent. Yet Abe wasn't sure. Could any nation with that much land, that many factories, truly be weak? Within a day, he would find his answer, not in glory, but in fire and disbelief. The attack on Pearl Harbor is remembered as one of the most dramatic moments in history. But to understand it, you have to see it through the eyes of the men who carried it out, men who believed they were changing the fate of their empire, only to realize they had awakened something far greater than they could imagine. Japan's path to Pearl Harbor wasn't born from confidence. It was born from desperation. In July 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt froze all Japanese assets in the United States and imposed a total oil embargo. Britain and the Dutch East Indies followed. Overnight, Japan lost nearly 80% of its oil supply. The empire's reserves, carefully hoarded for years, would last at most 18 months, and if war came, perhaps less than a year. Admiral Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, saw what this meant long before others did. He had studied at Harvard, lived in America, and walked through the humming factories of Detroit. He knew the scale of U.S. industry, and he feared it. In early 1941, Yamamoto wrote a warning to his government. Should hostilities break out between Japan and the United States, it will not be enough to seize Guam, the Philippines, or even Hawaii. To truly win, we would have to march into Washington and dictate peace in the White House. He ended with a grim question. I wonder if our politicians have confidence in the final outcome. He already knew the answer. They did not. But Yamamoto was a soldier. And so, despite his doubts, he began to plan the strike that would change history. His strategy was simple but desperate. Deliver a knockout blow to the American Pacific Fleet. Cripple it long enough for Japan to seize the oil fields of the Dutch East Indies. Then negotiate peace before the United States could rebuild. It was a gambler's move, and Yamamoto, the gambler, would lose everything. On November 26, 1941, the First Air Fleet slipped out of Hitakapu Bay under complete radio silence. 6 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku, carried more than 350 aircraft. They were escorted by battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and submarines. For nearly 2 weeks, they steamed across the storm-torn northern Pacific, through a route no American reconnaissance plane would ever think to search. At 6 a.m. on December 7, 1941, the fleet reached its launch point, 230 miles north of Oahu. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, standing on the deck of Akagi, gave the order. One after another, 183 aircraft roared into the dawn. Torpedo bombers, dive bombers, and fighters heading south toward Hawaii. For months, they had trained for this moment in Kagoshima Bay, chosen because it resembled Pearl Harbor. They practiced torpedo runs at impossibly low altitude, so low their propellers sometimes skimmed the water to perfect a new, shallow running torpedo that could strike ships in the harbor's 40-foot depth. Among those pilots was Kaname Harada from the carrier Soryu. Months earlier, he had sent his pregnant wife back to her parents' home and said goodbye without tears. Japanese tradition did not allow them. At 7:40 a.m., Fuchida's formation sighted Oahu. Below, the harbor was calm and crowded with ships, 8 battleships, cruisers, destroyers, all neatly moored. But something was wrong. The American carriers, Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga, weren't there. They were at sea. Still, Fuchida hesitated only a moment before firing a single blue flare, the signal to attack. He then radioed 3 words that would echo through history. Tora! 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 Tiger! 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 But for complete surprise achieved. At 7:55, the first bombs fell on Pearl Harbor. In less than 2 hours, the attack devastated the American Pacific Fleet. The battleship Arizona exploded when a bomb ignited her forward magazine, killing over 1,000 men in an instant. The Oklahoma capsized. 4 other battleships were heavily damaged. Nearly 200 U.S. aircraft were destroyed on the ground. By the time the smoke cleared, 2,403 Americans were dead and 1,178 wounded. Japan lost just 29 aircraft and about 130 men. By every conventional measure, it was a stunning victory. But not everyone on the Japanese side celebrated. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, flying in the second wave, dove his Aichi D-3A Val bomber through clouds of black smoke and anti-aircraft fire. Below him, the harbor was chaos. Burning ships, men diving into oil-slicked water, explosions echoing across the bay. And yet, amid the destruction, Abe felt something colder than fear, the sense that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Back aboard Akagi, Commander Fuchida begged Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo to launch a 3rd wave to destroy the remaining targets, the massive oil tanks, the submarine base, and the dry docks that could repair the fleet. Nagumo refused. Surprise was lost, he argued, and the carriers were vulnerable. He ordered a withdrawal. That decision, tactically cautious, strategically disastrous, would haunt Japan for the rest of the war. The facilities Nagumo spared allowed Pearl Harbor to rise again, stronger than before. As the task force turned for home, some pilots began to wonder about what they had seen. The vastness of the base, the endless rows of ships, the scale of the harbor. If this was just one U.S. naval outpost, how powerful was the country itself? The answer came soon enough. In 1941, Japan built just over 5,000 aircraft. That same year, even before entering the war, the United States produced more than 4 times that number. By 1942, Japan would lose 4 carriers at the Battle of Midway. America responded by launching the USS Essex, the first of 24 massive fleet carriers that would dominate the Pacific. Japan would never again operate more than 6 at once. By 1943, the numbers were staggering. Japan produced around 16,000 aircraft that entire year. America produced that many every 2 months. Factories that once made cars now made bombers. The Ford plant at Willow Run rolled out one B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes. Shipyards worked at the same impossible pace. The Liberty ship Robert E. Peary was built in just 4 days and 15 hours. A publicity stunt, yes, but a symbol of what was coming. By 1943, U.S. yards were launching 3 Liberty ships every 2 days. In only the first 4 months of that year, America produced more merchant shipping tonnage than Japan had in 7 years of preparation. This wasn't war. It was industrial annihilation. By 1944, the sky itself had become an American weapon. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea, 15 U.S. carriers faced Japan's dwindling fleet. 900 American aircraft filled the sky. When Japan launched its own strike, inexperienced pilots in outdated planes flew into a wall of anti-aircraft fire and American interceptors. The slaughter that followed became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japan lost between 350 and 600 aircraft in a single day. For the surviving Japanese pilots, it was incomprehensible. They had trained for years. Their replacements were boys with only months of rushed instruction. They wrote home in despair, "Where are all these aircraft coming from? We shoot them down and the sky fills again." By 1945, Japan's oil reserves were gone. American submarines, built faster than Japan could sink them, had cut supply lines completely. Tankers lay on the ocean floor by the hundreds. The proud Imperial Navy was trapped, powerless, reduced to defending its own shores. Many pilots were ordered to die as kamikazes, the final, desperate symbol of a nation that could no longer fight conventionally. When the atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, Japan was already broken. Its cities were burned, its navy destroyed, its skies empty. The industrial power it had challenged in 1941 had buried it in steel. During the war, the United States built nearly 300,000 aircraft, 86,000 tanks, 193,000 artillery pieces, and over 2 million trucks. Japan's total output barely reached a fraction of that. Yamamoto's prophecy had come true. 6 months of success, then nothing but defeat. He never lived to see it. In April 1943, American cryptanalysts intercepted his flight plan, and P-38 fighters shot down his plane over Bougainville. The man who had warned Japan of its doom died at the hands of the very industrial machine he had feared. Lieutenant Zenji Abe survived the war. But like many of his comrades, he spent the rest of his life haunted by what he had seen. They had believed they were striking a weak, unprepared nation. Instead, they had awakened a sleeping giant and filled it with a terrible resolve. Pearl Harbor, in the end, was not a victory at all. It was the first act in Japan's defeat. Because when Japan attacked America, it didn't just attack a navy, it challenged an entire civilization's capacity to build, to innovate and to endure, and that power, relentless, unyielding, unstoppable, would bury Japan in steel, in fire, and in history.